Intro. Before the first stone was lifted at Giza. Before Rome drew its roads or Greece etched its legends into marble. There was a whisper buried in the soil between two rivers. A forgotten beginning. Older than history dares to admit. Long ago, in a land cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates, the first spark of civilization flickered to life. To the ancient Greeks, it was Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. These waters, flowing gently from the mountains of eastern Turkey to the Persian Gulf, carved out a lush plain. Today we know it as Iraq. Back then, it was something far more sacred. Here, the first cities rose from the earth, not of stone, but of clay and dreams. People gathered not just to survive, but to imagine, to write, to wonder. Laws were born, things took shape, and eyes turned upward to the stars, asking questions that still haunt us, from the end of the Ice Age around 10,000 BCE to the fall of Babylon in 539 BCE. This land bore witness to a new kind of human story. Kings ruled from thrones of mud brick. In bronze, scribes etched meaning into soft clay with the edge of a reed. And high above them all, ziggurats reached skyward, trying to bridge the space between man and the divine. And though their cities have crumbled and their names have faded, their stories endure hidden in fragments of earth, in symbols pressed by forgotten hands. This is where it all began. Not just buildings and borders, but the human longing to build something that lasts. But here's the question that lingers. Quietly, like the rivers that still flow there, did they leave behind more than we found? A warning, a map, a memory meant for us? Or are we simply tracing shadows in the dirt, believing we've reached the beginning when the real story lies even deeper? The dawn of civilization. It began not with a monument, but with a moment. As the great ice sheets retreated, something ancient began to stir, in stone but in soil. And in the silence that followed the thaw, humanity's first whisper of civilization took root. Around 10,000 BC, the world began to change. Southwest Asia, long locked in ice, slowly began to warm. And in the valleys between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, something unexpected happened. Nature opened its hand and people paused. Small bands of hunter-gatherers, who had spent generations chasing herds and harvesting wild plants, noticed something different. Fields of wild wheat and barley, growing freely in the sun. For the first time, the land itself seemed to offer them a choice. They stayed in places like Tel Muribit, Abu Huraira, and Murray, now northern Syria. They built modest clusters of round homes from reeds and mud. No kings, no temples, just people. Learning what it meant to belong to a place, they still hunted gazelle. They still gathered pistachios. But they returned season after season. And soon, staying became living. Then, in the Jordan Valley, something even more astonishing emerged. Jericho 11,000 years ago. Its people raised stone walls, not just to shelter themselves, but to protect what they had built. They even constructed a tower massive, mysterious. Its true purpose remains debated to this day. A signal, a sanctuary, or something else we've yet to understand. Farther east, in Catalyuk, another settlement defied expectations. Homes were built wall to wall, so tightly knit there were no streets. People moved across the rooftops, slipping into their houses through openings above like ants in a hive. Was this safety? Was it culture? Or both? Yet for all the walls and rooftops, the real revolution was unfolding in silence. The fields, the wild grasses were no longer wild. Early farmers began choosing the ones with fuller seeds, stronger stalks, and over time wheat was born. Domestication didn't stop with plants. The fierce aurochs, ancestors of modern cattle, were tamed. Goats, sheep, and pigs followed. No longer at the mercy of the hunt, people began to shape their own fate. This slow, quiet shift spread across the Fertile Crescent, stretching from the Persian Gulf, curving through the river valleys, reaching the shores of the Mediterranean. It took centuries, but with each passing generation, life changed. And here lies the quiet curiosity. What truly drove them? Was it hunger? or hope. For the first time, people produced more food than they needed, and that changed everything. Some became potters. Some wove. Others made tools. Society of specialists emerged, people trading skills for grain. And in the 6th millennium BC, fire met clay. Pottery was born. Containers once carved from wood or woven from reeds were now fired into strong, watertight vessels. Food could be stored, water could travel, and knowledge could last. As food production grew, new challenges surfaced. In the low plains between the rivers, rainfall was scarce, but the floods were rich with silt. To survive, people began carving channels into the land. The first irrigation systems, deliberate, organized, astonishing by the 5th millennium BC. The southern plains transformed. Villages like Eridu and Uruk, simple clusters of farmers, grew into true cities, not by chance, by coordination. Managing water, storing grain, defending against raiders. These tasks demanded leadership. Temples rose, first as shrines, then as sacred centers of power and provision. Grain was collected, surpluses managed, prayers offered. The gods, once distant forces of wind and rain, were now personified, and those who spoke for them held power. A new kind of society took shape, layered, ordered, unequal. The age of shared survival gave way to status, role, and rule. Metal tools appeared, first copper, then through brilliant discovery, bronze. Harder, sharper, longer lasting. Trade routes expanded like veins across the land. Obsidian from Anatolia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, shells from the Gulf. And at the heart of it all, a city called Uruk. But as the temples filled, another problem grew. How do you keep track of it all? Grain, goats, oil, offerings. At first they used token small symbols to count, but soon those tokens became marks, and those marks became writing, simple pictographs at first, then symbols, then sounds, then language. It was the birth of something the world would never forget. Writing, memory made visible. A voice carved in clay. By the 4th millennium BC, the pieces were all in place. Cities with thousands of people, specialized professions, monumental buildings, long-distance trade, complex religion, and for the first time, written history.
Hey!
But here's what we don't always ask. Why did it all begin here?
Why then?
Hey, why this crescent of land? And if the spark of civilization could rise so gently from wild grass and stone huts, what does that say about us today? Is it chance or design? Instinct or destiny? The answers lie beneath layers of earth, in seeds, in clay, in whispers, because this was not just the beginning of farming, or writing, or kings. It was the beginning of us, and the story is just getting started. The rise of Babylon, asterisk in the dust of forgotten cities. Beyond the fall of empires, a quiet place by the Euphrates River began to stir. It was called Babylon, once small, almost invisible. But from its silence rose a voice that would one day command all of Mesopotamia. After the mightier dynasty crumbled, Mesopotamia was left in fragments. City-states vied for power like scattered stars, each flickering, none dominant. Larsa to the east, Mari on the Euphrates, Ashnana in the hills each fought for land, water, and trade. None could truly rise above the rest. But it wasn't just politics shifting. From the Syrian deserts came Amorites, Semitic wanderers. With new tongues and restless ambition, they didn't conquer outright. They settled, blended, and took root. Among them was a leader named Sumabum, who chose for his capital a small, almost unremarkable town on the Euphrates, Babylon. At first, Babylon was just another voice in the crowded noise of Mesopotamia. Its first kings built walls, dug canals, honored gods just like their rivals. Cities like Larsa had more gold, more glory. But then, something changed. In 1792 BC, the sixth king of Babylon took the throne. His name was Hammurabi. At first, he didn't march to war. He built. repaired, listened. He strengthened canals, renovated temples, and wrote letters, hundreds of them, managing even the smallest details of his kingdom. But beneath that calm surface was calculation. Here's where curiosity stirs. Why did Hammurabi wait? Was he watching for? And how did this quiet king become one of history's greatest rulers? Midway through his reign, the storm broke. City by city, Hammurabi began his conquest. Methodical, relentless. Uruk, Isin, Larsa. Each one fell, but Hammurabi didn't just destroy, he absorbed. He rewove the map, pulling cities into Babylon's orbit like moons around a new sun, even Ashur in the north birthplace of the future. Assyrian Empire fell beneath his hand, and suddenly, for the first time in centuries, Mesopotamia was united. But Hammurabi didn't boast of conquest. He called himself a shepherd, not a tyrant, but a guardian, chosen by the gods to bring order. And from that divine appointment came his most enduring legacy, the Code of Hammurabi, etched into stone, towering over 2 meters tall. The code listed 282 laws, covering everything from trade and inheritance to marriage, medicine, and crime. It spoke of justice, not equality, but balance. It's an eye for an eye. If you were of equal rank, if not, the scale tipped, shaped by class. And yet, it sought fairness. Again and again, it called for protection of the widow, the orphan, the poor. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about order, about holding together. A world always at the edge of chaos. Behind the laws was a man deeply involved in every detail. Hammurabi wrote to governors, punished corruption, even micromanaged temple rituals. He wasn't just a king. He was a manager of a living machine. And as Babylon grew in strength, so too did its god, Mard. No longer a local deity, Marduk rose to the top of the divine order, king of the gods. Just as Hammurabi had risen among kings, when Hammurabi died in 1750 BC, his empire stretched across nearly all of Mesopotamia. A dream realized. A golden age, or so it seemed. But unity is a fragile thing. His son inherited the throne, but not the same grip. Rebellions flared in the south. From the marshlands, a group known as the Sealand dynasty seized coastal cities. From the mountains, eastern raiders pressed in. Within 50 years, half the empire had slipped away. And then, the sky opened. From the far north came an enemy no one expected. The Hittites, foreign, distant, and unknown, marched 500 miles to Babylon's gates. The defenders, unprepared for this silent thunder from Anatolia, collapsed. In 1595 BC, Babylon fell in a single, stunning blow. Its treasures looted, its dynasty ended. But the Hittites didn't stay. They vanished, satisfied with plunder. And into the vacuum stepped the Kassites, mountain-born and long-watching. They took the throne, but not the soul of Babylon. They adopted its language, its laws, its gods. And Babylon lived on. It's a city that had risen from obscurity, that ruled by balance and vision, that fell in a single raid, never truly died. Babylon became something more than an empire. It became a symbol, a memory woven into law, into stars, into stone. And here's what lingers. Was Babylon's true power in its armies, or in its ideas? Because long after kingdoms fall and stones decay, what remains are the stories they tell, and Babylon's story still echoes quiet, steady like the river that first gave it life. The rise of Sumer, before empires had names, before maps were drawn. In the southern reaches of Mesopotamia, something quietly extraordinary took root. Not a myth, not a legend, but the first heartbeat of a civilization. It's born not of conquest, but of water, clay, and human will. Where the twin rivers began to kiss the sea, a stretch of fertile land grew into the very cradle of urban life. This was the alluvial plain, rich, swampy, and deceptively silent. Here, in the heart of what would be called Sumer, the world's first cities began to rise, not in myth, but in mud, brick, and memory. Among them stood Uruk, not just a city, but a statement. Its walls stretched across the horizon, homes pressed together like veins beneath its surface. At the center, gleaming in the sunlight, stood the White Temple, perched high above the flatlands, shining like a beacon. It wasn't just architecture. It was devotion in stone, and it would inspire the towering ziggurats that later civilizations would raise in awe. But Uruk wasn't alone. From Eridu to Lagash, from Nippur to Kishisides bloomed like stars in the soil. Each had its patron god, each its own voice. These were not just villages grown fat, they were organized, pulsing societies. People no longer just farmed. They traded, crafted, governed. Potters spun clay, scribes etched secrets into tablets, and priests whispered prayers into the wind. And yet, what made it all work? How did these scattered cities build temples so vast, walls so strong, order so precise? That's where the mystery deepens. Leadership began not in palaces, but in temples. The priest, seen as the mouthpiece of the divine, held the people's trust. But in times of crisis, one would rise. A figure they called the Lugal, the big man. At first temporary, chosen to guide during war or flood, but power clings to the hands that hold it. Over time, these Lugals became kings, and once kings rose, they didn't step down. Soon royal tombs glimmered with gold and grave goods, musical instruments, jeweled daggers, sacrificed servants, all laid beside rulers who claimed they served the gods, but seemed increasingly like gods themselves. Religion was everywhere. Each city housed its gods, as you'd house a king lavishly, with food and song. Enki, Inanna, Enlil, names whispered in awe. They weren't distant deities. They were moody, hungry, powerful presences. And the priests were their caretakers, or perhaps their interpreters. The people believed life was a cycle shaped by divine will. Disease came from demons, healing from gods. Stars weren't just lights, they were messages, and yet they tracked them with precision. They studied the skies, calculated the calendar. Their blend of logic and myth remains unsettlingly familiar. And then came the gift that changed everything. Writing at first, just marks on clay. A way to count grain or sheep. But those marks evolved. From pictures to sounds. Two ideas, cuneiform by 2500 BC. The scribes could write not just numbers, but stories, laws, dreams, pleas to the gods. One tale from Uruk speaks of a king named Gilgamesh, a man who sought eternal life, found only the truth of death. Even in their time, the Sumerians questioned what we still ponder today. What makes a life meaningful? Why must we die? Is there more beyond the veil? Their law codes, less famous than Hammurabi's, but just as revealing, spoke of justice through compensation, not cruelty. Their medicine blended herbal knowledge with spiritual diagnosis. Trade stretched to distant lands, Afghanistan, the Indus Valley, the Persian Gulf, lapis, obsidian, copper. They built a world on exchange, and beneath the grandeur were the people, farmers who bent over salt-crusted fields, mothers who told stories in the shadow of ziggurats, scribes who learned to draw the curve of a word, slaves, artisans, traders. Each one a thread in a new tapestry of urban life. Women held rights often lost in later centuries. Some owned land, others ran businesses. Some even served in temples as priestesses. It was not equality, but it was something. But peace was fragile. Water rights sparked wars. Trade routes bred envy. And despite their cultural unity, the city-states of Sumer tore at each other's borders. Around 2500 BC, a ruler of Amma briefly pulled them together. But it would not last, because to the north, a shadow was rising. A man named Sargon would change everything. The cities of Sumer would fall, their names buried. Their gods forgotten by most, but their ideas, they never vanished. Their writing carved the path for law. Their myths shaped our understanding of mortality. Their stars became our science. So here's the mystery. If a civilization can die, but its voice still echoes in our laws, our stories, our skies, did it ever truly disappear? or Sumer still speaking, just through different tongues. The Empire of Iron and Shadow, in the shadowed north of ancient Mesopotamia, where mountains cradle silence and the Tigris winds through forgotten valleys, a storm was quietly forming. Not a storm of rain or wind, but of iron. From a single city Assuras, a force the world had never seen before. It wouldn't just conquer, it would terrify. And its name would echo through history. As a whisper of power and fear, before it became an empire, Assyria was only a name etched on trade tablets. Merchants moved goods through Anatolia, down to the rivers, across distant seas. But these people were watching more than markets. They were learning mapping, not just routes, but weaknesses. Then, something shifted. Around the 14th century BC, the traders became warriors. Ashur's kings began sending letters to pharaohs, no longer as subordinates but as equals. The quiet north was no longer content to listen. It wanted to speak in the language of conquest. By the 13th century BC, armies marched outward. Iron replaced bronze. Fear replaced diplomacy. Where others stumbled through the collapse of the Bronze Age, Assyria held its line, tight, brutal, yielding. And then came a king like no other Tiglath-Pileser. He didn't just fight battles. He crossed the Euphrates 28 times. He hunted. Lions, not for sport, but as a royal ritual. To him, domination was divine. War was sacred. But how did they hold such vast lands? How did one kingdom stretch from Egypt to Iran? The answer was terror. Stone walls carved with scenes of impalement. And flaying weren't just for show, they were warnings. Rebellion would bring ruin. Entire cities were wiped off the map, their people deported, their names erased. Why such cruelty? Was it pure malice or a calculated strategy to keep control? Even so, beneath the blood and iron, something remarkable was growing. Assyrian roads connected cities like arteries. Administrators kept detailed records, while kings built libraries instead of just palaces. Ashurbanipal, and scholar, boasted of reading ancient texts himself. His library preserved the soul of a civilization. And that soul would outlive even its masters. But what does it mean when the most brutal empire is also the one that tried hardest to preserve knowledge? And then it ended. In 612 BC, Nineveh fell. The empire that ruled through fear was consumed by it. Ashes swallowed its libraries. Silence returned to its palaces. And in 2 generations, its great cities became little more than dust-covered mounds. But here's what no one expected. The Assyrian legacy didn't die the way they governed. Systems they built, the roads, the writing, the empire itself. They became the template. Rome would borrow them. Persia would refine them. Even today, our maps, our empires, our states echo what the Assyrians dreamed. So now we're left with a haunting question. Did they rule with cruelty because they feared collapse? Or did they see before anyone else that in a world slipping into chaos, only fear could hold it together? Whispers from Forgotten Stone, the Neo-Sumerian revival. Imagine a world reborn from the ashes of a fallen empire. Cities that once lay shattered in silence begin to rise again, not with swords, but with scrolls, ziggurats, and sacred dreams. What if the greatest renaissance in ancient Mesopotamia was not driven by conquest, but by devotion? After the world's first empire dissolved into dust, the lands between the rivers, once tightly bound under Sargon's rule, fractured like dried earth beneath a scorching sun. From the northern mountains, the Gutians descended, wild and unpredictable. Known in Sumerian texts as the Dragon of the Mountains, they brought no laws, no cities, no unity, only raids, tribute, fear. But south of their shadow, something extraordinary began to stir. Like seeds sprouting in abandoned fields, the old city-states slowly reawakened. The memories of empire had not faded, and among the ancient stones, new visions began to take root. One such place was Lagashand, under the guidance of a humble yet determined ruler named Gudea. It became a beacon of cultural light. Gudea did not raise armies. He raised temples. His statues carved from distant dark diorite still sit in quiet reverence, palms pressed in prayer, as if whispering across 4,000 years. Inscriptions on their bases tell of dreams sent by gods, of divine blueprints for sacred shrines, and of a leader who believed the world could be rebuilt through harmony. But the true architect of revival would come not from Lagash, but from Ur. Around 2112 BCE, a ruler named Ur-Nammu emerged. His dream was different. He didn't seek to conquer the world. He sought to organize it. He drove the Gutians from the north. Not with fire and fear, but with structure, with order. He introduced a legal code, the oldest known in history. Long before Hammurabi etched his laws into stone, Ur-Nammu had already written of justice. His laws didn't just punish, they protected widows, orphans, the poor. Even traffic on the canals had rules under his hand. But he didn't stop there. Above the flatlands of Sumer, his architects raised the towering ziggurat of Ur, a mountain made of mud brick and faith. It reached toward the heavens in 3 ascending tiers, its staircases winding like the very path to the gods. His son Shulgi would rule for nearly 5 decades, refining what his father began. He brought standard weights, a national calendar, royal messengers, tax systems, and schools to train future scribes in the sacred tongue of Sumer. He called himself divine. Whether this was hubris or poetry, the people built temples in his name. Even their love poems took on celestial tones. In hymns, Shulgi wasn't just king, he was Inanna's husband, entwining mortal rule with divine love. The people believed that through their king, the cosmos itself found balance. Their economy blended control and freedom. While the temples and palaces directed vast estates and production lines, merchants still sailed east toward the Indus and west into Elam. Trade boomed. Art flourished. Literacy thrived. From creation myths to star charts, from legal tablets to love songs, the scribes of this age didn't just record life, they shaped it. Did even golden ages grow heavy under their own brilliance? As Shulgi's light dimmed, his successors faltered. The earth itself began to betray them. Years of irrigation without rest had salted the soil. Droughts came. Crops failed. The price of grain soared, and as the rivers thinned, so too did loyalty. Governors withheld tribute. Nomads crept in from the west. The once tight web of unity began to fray. A ruler named Ibisin, the last of his line, struggled to hold it all together. Desperate letters from his governors pleaded for help. None came. And then, from the east, the Elamites marched. In 2004 BCE, the city of Ur-Thajul of the Sumerian revival was taken. Its sacred ziggurat desecrated, its people scattered, and Ibius was led away in chains. A lament written shortly after reads, "The city has been defiled. The treasuries have been pillaged. Corpses float in the Euphrates, which once brought life." And yet this is not the end. The ziggurats still stood, the laws still echoed. The language, the hymns, the architecture they endured. Even as empires rose and fell. The legacy of the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance threaded itself through every age that followed. So perhaps the question isn't why Ur fell, but how its soul continued to shape the future long after its walls turned to dust. What truly holds a civilization together? Stone or story, power or purpose? And if the divine once walked among humans in the temples of Ur, where did they go when the towers fell? Maybe they never left. The silent kings of Babylon, a forgotten reign. In the great theater of ancient empires, some rulers carve their names in thunder. Others whisper through time, barely leaving footprints, yet holding power longer than all the conquerors. Before them, who were these kings that ruled Babylon for 400 years without a war that made history? This is the story of a dynasty built not on conquest, but quiet. After the chaos, when Hammurabi's line was shattered by the sudden strike of the Hittites, Babylon was left broken, its throne cold. From the east, across the harsh Zagros Mountains, came a people few had paid much attention to. They weren't known for building empires. They were mountain warriors, settlers, hired swords. But when Babylon stood still, the Kassites stepped in, and what they built was not an empire of expansion, but an era of stability. Agam. 2. The leader who rose from the silence didn't burn the past, he restored it. His dynasty didn't seek to erase Mesopotamia's traditions. They honored them. They took Babylon's ancient gods as their own. They used the same language, the same rituals, even the same titles. It wasn't a takeover, it was a transformation. As if history had chosen a caretaker, not a conqueror, the world around them was shifting. No single kingdom ruled the Near East anymore. Instead, the land was divided among powerful players: Egypt, Hittites, Mitanni, Assyria, and Babylon, locked in a strange balance of friendship, rivalry, and diplomacy. Historians call it the Club of Great Powers, a geopolitical dance where kings called each other brother in clay-carved letters, written in Akkadian, the language of kings. Princesses were exchanged like treaties, and gold flowed with every alliance. One Kassite ruler even scolded the pharaoh of Egypt for sending too little. Gold, he wrote, is as common as dust in your land. You can do better. This was a diplomacy with pride and purpose. Behind the quiet diplomacy, the Kassites built something more lasting than walls. They granted land to loyal nobles, marking each estate with Kajuru stones inscribed boundary markers protected by the names of gods and curses against trespassers. It was an early form of feudalism, but with a divine signature. They didn't just guard territory, look to the skies. Kassite priests and scholars became obsessed with the heavens, not just to worship, but to understand. They tracked planets, recorded omens, watched the stars move again and again till they began to predict. It was here during their long reign that the zodiac 12 constellations across the sky began to take form. Was it just superstition? Or the beginning of something deeper, an attempt to map fate? Even in medicine, their approach was dual. Physical treatments blended with spiritual rituals. They wrote diagnostic manuals linking symptoms to outcomes. Some remedies were herbal, others were prayers. They didn't fully understand the body. They observed it with precision and care. Their scribes collected knowledge like treasure cataloging laws, divine names, languages, grammar, medical diagnoses. They weren't inventing the first encyclopedia, but they were thinking like people who would. Their artists carved seals so delicate they still challenge modern tools. Their glassmakers created colorful vessels for kings. And through it all, Babylon thrived, not with armies, but with rituals, markets, and meaning. They restored the Temple of Marduk, again and again, keeping the spiritual heart of Babylon alive. But time doesn't stand still for even the most careful rulers to the north. Assyria, once a quiet trading city, was becoming something more dangerous. Rulers like Adad-nirari and Shalmaneser, I turned it into a military machine. The balance that had kept the region steady, the fragile peace among the great powers, began to tremble. Then, everything began to fall apart. Around 1200 BC, one after another, civilizations collapsed. The Hittite Empire vanished, its capital burned and abandoned. Egypt suffered invasions by the mysterious sea peoples. Trade routes disintegrated. Cities emptied. Famine, war, migrations. The world unraveled. This is what we now call the Bronze Age collapse, a total breakdown of the systems that once held everything together. And still, the Kassites held on. They outlasted giants. But in the end, even their stability couldn't hold. From the southeast, a new threat appeared. The Elamites, fierce warriors from what is now Iran, raided deep into Babylon. Their king, Shetruk-Nakunt, destroyed cities, looted temples, and carried off the very symbols of Babylon's glory, the law code of Hammurabi. The victory stele of Narims and taken like trophies, as if to say, your time is over. And so it ended. In 1155 BC, a native Babylonian dynasty from the city of Isin seized power, bringing the Kassite era to a close. But their legacy lingered. They ruled longer than any other dynasty in Babylon's history. Yet they remain shadows in our records, mentioned rarely, studied seldom. How did they rise? How did they rule so long without war, without spectacle land, yet vanish into the margins of time? Maybe their true power wasn't in what they conquered, but in what they preserved. A whisper between empires, bridge between collapse and rebirth, and maybe somewhere beneath the ruins, their voice still echoes, waiting for someone to ask the right question, or find the last missing stone. Sargon's shadow, the empire that changed everything, before Babylon rose, before empires became the norm. There was a man who stepped out of legend, carving an empire from dust, one conquest at a time. He came from nowhere and changed the ancient world forever. His name was Sargon, but to his people, he was known simply as the true king. To the north of Sumer's timeless cities, where temples touched sky and myths took shape, another culture had begun to stir in the open. Plains of central Mesopotamia. These people didn't speak the language of the south. They were Semitic, not Sumerian. Their customs, their rhythm, their gods were different. But their eyes, too, were on power. Their center was Akkad, city spoken of with awe, yet never found. Somewhere near modern-day Baghdad, its ruins remain lost beneath layers of earth and time. Came a figure who would transform everything. Sargon, a man wrapped in myth. He claimed no royal blood. Some stories say he was born to a gardener. Others that he was abandoned in a basket on the Euphrates, adrift like a Mesopotamian Moses. But somehow, against every odd, he found his way into the palace of Kish, not as a prince, but as a cupbearer. And from that humble post, he rose. Around 2334 BC, Sargon seized power in Kish. How? We may never know. But what followed wasn't a local coup. It was the birth of empire, his first target, the south, there. A ruler named Lugal-Zagas-Sagasi had managed to unite many Sumerian cities under his control. He stood as the final guardian of the old order, the city-state system that had defined Mesopotamia for centuries. But Sargon had a different vision. Not scattered cities ruled by fragile alliances, but a single, unified state. One crown, one ruler. One empire. In a series of ruthless campaigns, Sargon crushed his rivals. He claimed to have washed his weapons in the sea, a poetic way of saying his armies reached the Persian Gulf, and when the dust settled, did something unheard of. He replaced the kings of the conquered with his own men as brothers, sons, and loyal commanders. This wasn't just conquest. It was a revolution. The world's first empire had been born. The Akkadian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean expanse, never seen before in the ancient world. It wasn't just Mesopotamia anymore. Parts of modern Syria, Turkey and Iran were now under Sargon's rule. To hold this realm together, he used more than swords. Used systems. He made his own language, the Semitic Akkadian, the official tongue of government. He standardized weights, measures, and trade protocols. And he created something terrifyingly new, a standing army. 5,400 professional soldiers who ate at his table and followed no city, no god, only him. Under Sargon's empire, trade blossomed. Ships and caravans moved freely under imperial protection, traveling to distant places like the Indus Valley and Central Asia in search of rare goods, lapis lazuli, carnelian, tin, but every silver lining had its weight. Taxes were heavy. Laborers were taken for grand projects or wars. Cities that rebelled were crushed, their walls torn down. Sometimes whole populations were uprooted and moved. It was peace, but not mercy. Still, for nearly 6 decades, Sargon ruled. His long reign allowed his empire to take root. When he died around 2279 BC, the age of city-states was over. In its place stood something new, something permanent, the age of empires. But what Sargon built, his sons struggled to hold. Ramush and Manishtushu, his sons, spent their short reigns chasing rebellions and putting down unrest. Both died violently, possibly murdered. It would be Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, who would bring the empire to its absolute peak. Naram-Sin was a commander, a builder, a strategist. When major cities rebelled, he struck with force, crushing them one by one, rebuilding what had been lost then. He made a declaration that shocked the ancient world. He wasn't just king. He was a god. His name was written with the divine determinative, the symbol of deities. His statue showed him wearing the horned crown, once reserved only for gods. In a world where rulers claimed divine favor, Naram-Sin claimed divine status. It was bold. It was dangerous. It changed everything. His famous victory, Stele found, far from home in Susa, shows him towering above soldiers, trampling enemies beneath his feet. He is not just leading men. He is myth incarnate. The style of the God King, larger than life, would shape royal art for centuries across the ancient Near East. But even divine kings bleed. Holding an empire of that scale with only primitive roads and slow messengers proved nearly impossible. Governors, often his own family, grew too powerful. The empire was too large, the armies too stretched, people too burdened, and pressure building from the outside. From the east came the Gudi, fierce mountain tribes from the Zagrus. From the west, rising cities in Syria began to challenge Akkadian power. After Naram-Sin's death around 20 to 18 BC, his son Sharkali-Shara tried to hold the center, but the cracks had already widened. Revolts surged. Provinces broke away. Enemies invaded. A later text written in the confusion of this time asks a haunting question: who was king? Who was not king? No one knew anymore. The last king of the dynasty, his name barely remembered, was overthrown by 2154 BC. The first empire was gone. Some say it fell because of pride that Naram-Sin, by calling himself a god, had angered the heavens. Others blame the soil, too much farming, too little rest, or the trade routes, too vast to guard. But maybe the real reason is more human. Empires, like people, have limits. And once the dream outgrows the dreamer, it begins to break. Still, what the Akkadians built never truly disappeared. The idea of empire, of one ruler, one law, one people, became a seed. And it would bloom, again and again, even 2,000 years later. Assyrian kings would whisper Sargon's name to prove they belonged on the throne. His empire may have vanished. The twilight of Mesopotamia echoes of a forgotten world. What happens when the first light of civilization begins to dim, but refuses to die? Long after the kings fell silent and the gods were abandoned, the land between two rivers kept whispering its story. This is not the tale of a fall. It is the story of a long fading, of a world that would not let go. In 539 BC, the gates of Babylon swung open to welcome a new master. The Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great, entered, not with fire but with reverence. It was the beginning of Mesopotamia's twilight as slow, its graceful descent, not into darkness, but into transformation. Under Persian rule, the old ways weren't destroyed. They were respected. Temples were maintained. Ceremonies continued. Persian kings knelt in Babylonian shrines, even as the empire they commanded stretched across continents. Babylon's astronomers, with their sky maps and precise calculations, influenced Persian views of the cosmos. Cultural continuity held strong, but the independence of the old city-states was gone. Then came Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Sweeping across the Near East like a wildfire in armor, he entered Babylon as a liberator, welcomed with celebration. Perhaps the people believed just for a moment that the age of glory would return. Alexander saw the city for what it was, jewel of history, and he dreamed of making it the capital of his new world. Temples were to be restored, palaces rebuilt. Babylon would rise again, but destiny intervened. In 323 BC, in the palace once built by Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander died young, unstoppable, suddenly gone. The dream fractured. His generals fought. Over the pieces, one of them, Seleucus, claimed Mesopotamia and built a new city, Seleucia, on the Tigris. A Greek city, just north of ancient Babylon, laid out in perfect grids, filled with theaters, gymnasiums, and marble halls. It was a message. The future is here. It speaks Greek. Babylon's people drifted northward, drawn by opportunity. And the old city began to fade not in ruin, but in relevance. Yet the past didn't vanish. It adapted. A strange blend began to form, Greek and Mesopotamian worlds intertwining. Cuneiform tablets still etched the skies. Ancient stories were still copied in scriptoriums hidden in temple walls. Meanwhile, philosophers walked colonnaded streets, and priests translated epics into Greek for kings who didn't know the old. Zeus became Marduk, Apollo became Nabu, Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, became Ishtar, queen of the heavens. The gods blurred, the myths twisted, and slowly a new spiritual fabric was woven from threads thousands of years old. But history moved on. The Seleucid Empire weakened. Into the cracks came a new power, the Parthians, horse-borne warriors from Central Asia. By 141 BC, they had seized Mesopotamia. The Hellenistic order gave way to something older, rougher, and rooted in the East. The Parthians did not erase Greek culture, but they did shift the balance. Aramaic grew in prominence. Iranian styles shaped art and royal symbolism. Their rule was looser, more localo, allowing temples and city councils to run themselves. Babylon still stood, but it was now a shadow. New cities rose, Seleucia still glittered, while Ctesiphon, just across the river, became the Parthian seat of power. And yet, Uruk, one of humanity's oldest cities, still pulsed with life. Its great temple to Ishtar remained active in echo, from the dawn of time, still alive in the age of iron, but something more final was coming. The end of cuneiform, the writing of the gods, was near. For over 3,000 years, Mesopotamia had written its destiny on clay tablets. But the last astronomical cuneiform tablet dates to a D75. By then, the script was a relic, secret language, fading. Not in fire, but in silence. In this shifting world, Judaism flourished. Communities that had remained since the Babylonian exile developed deep roots. It was here, in the cities of Mesopotamia, that the foundations of the Babylonian Talmud were lay texts that would echo across Jewish history for millennia. Then came the Sassanid Empire in AD 224, replacing Parthian rule with order, hierarchy. And ambition, Zoroastrianism, was now the faith of the state. Temples of fire burned and tolerance narrowed. Taxes rose. Labor increased. But cities like Ctesiphon reached incredible heights. Its arched halls would later inspire Islamic palaces and Persian poetry. Still, Babylon lingered. And in hidden temples, aging priests carried out forgotten rites alone, chanting the names of gods that no longer answered then. A final wind swept across the land. In the 630s, the Arab conquests arrived. The Sassanid armies fell at the Battle of Qadisiyah, and Mesopotamia, once cradle of the gods, became part of the Islamic world. A new capital would rise, Baghdad. It's built in 762, just kilometers from the ancient cities buried beneath the soil. This empire was different, but its roots were not. Entirely new, though the gods of Sumer and Akkad were forgotten. Those ziggurats crumbled and cuneiform faded into dust, as Mesopotamia never truly disappeared. Its knowledge flowed into Islamic science. Its canals still fed fields. Its laws whispered through the bureaucracy of caliphs. Its myths became folktales with no known origin. The people didn't remember where it all came from, but they carried it like a memory inherited through blood. So when did Mesopotamia end? It didn't. It dissolved, like a great river fanning into marshland. Its culture mixed with the world, feeding it, and vanishing into it. Its cities sleep beneath dust. Its gods are silent. Its script unreddened, hell rediscovered by modern hands. But in every library, every law book, every star chart and story about the heavens, there's a fingerprint, a soft echo, a reminder that here between the Tigris and the Euphrates civilization was born. And though its name faded, its soul never truly left. The last light of Babylon, rise, glory, and the silent fall. It was meant to be the end. And yet from the ashes of a crumbling Assyrian world, something extraordinary arose, a final blaze of beauty and brilliance before the night descended. On Mesopotamia forever, the Assyrians had ruled with iron and fire. But when their empire collapsed, the void it left behind whispered of opportunity, ambition. From the marshlands and deserts of southern Mesopotamia, a tribal leader emerged, Nabopolassar, man of Chaldean roots, hardened by decades of foreign domination. In 626 BC, he declared Babylon free. Slowly, piece by piece, he took it back. His timing was perfect. Assyria was bleeding, and with a crucial alliance with the Medes, Nabopolassar did the unthinkable. In 612 BC, Nineveh, the heart of the Assyrian beast, fell in flames. But toppling an empire was only the beginning. What came next was rebirth. When Nabopolassar died in 605 BC, he left behind a kingdom with fresh foundations. But it was his son Nebuchadnezzar II who would raise the empire to the heavens, young. Already tested in battle, Nebuchadnezzar had driven the Egyptians out of former Assyrian lands, securing Babylon's western front. His military victories stretched across Syria, Palestine, and reached the borders of Egypt. And then came Jerusalem. In 597 BC, he laid siege to the holy city, and again, in 587, he returned with fury. The Temple of Solomon was destroyed. The Judean elite were exiled to Babylon, a wound etched forever in biblical memory by the rivers of Babylon. We sat and wept. But war was not Nebuchadnezzar's legacy. Wonder was. The tribute from conquests, the wealth of trade, the bounty of fertile lands, all of it flowed into Babylon. It became stone, brick, gold, and legend. He rebuilt the city not as it was, but as no city had ever been. Its walls were so vast, they said a 4-horse chariot could spin atop them. The Euphrates ran through its heart, tamed by canals and quays. Its processional roads glistened with glazed bricks, lined with lions and dragons, leading to the temple of Marduk, Babylon's god. And towering above it all stood Etemenankia's ziggurat, so tall it kissed the sky. 7 tiers of color and myth, the likely inspiration for what would become the Tower of Babel, and nearby, perhaps only in dream and tale, grew the hanging gardens, lush terraces defying desert air. Built, it said, to ease the homesickness of a queen from the mountains. Whether myth or memory, they became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In Babylon, even the calendar became theater. Each spring, the New Year festival turned city and king into sacred ritual. The epic Enuma Elish was sung, Marduk conquering chaos, order born from storm. And the king, no matter how mighty, knelt before the god. The high priest struck his face. The ruler was humiliated. For in Babylon the divine ruled above all, and beyond the temples and palaces, order. Nebuchadnezzar expanded irrigation. Trade routes were secured. Ancient cities and temples were revived, and culture flourished. In the courts of Babylon, astronomers gazed at the heavens not for beauty, but for patterns, for omens. Their calculations, born of faith, became the foundation of science. In scribal schools, myths were refined histories, recorded, medicines cataloged, and contracts carved in clay. Private banking families funded farms and caravans. Temples and palaces managed vast estates. Babylon, in its final flowering, wasn't just a city, it was a civilization in full bloom. But even the most brilliant light casts long shadows. In 562 BC, Nebuchadnezzar died, and with him, stability. His son Amel-Marduk, called Evil Merodach in biblical texts, was overthrown. Then came generals, regency, power struggles. Finally, a named Nabonidus, strange, devout, absent. Nabonidus loved not Marduk, but Sin, the moon god. He left the city for 10 years, ruling from an oasis in Arabia. His son Belshazzar remained in Babylon, but the damage was done. The priests of Marduk felt betrayed. The elites ignored. The people uneasy. And in the east, new empire stirred. Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, was not like the others. He conquered not with destruction, but with precision. In 539 BC, the Persian army approached. In Babylon, tired and divided, opened its gates. The writing on the wall, as remembered in the book of Daniel, tells of a doomed king feasting while enemies breached his city. But reality was quieter, perhaps more tragic. There was no bloodbath, no flames, just a change of hands. Cyrus entered as a liberator. He honored Marduk, restored temples, released exiles, and just like that, Babylon was no longer a kingdom. It was a province rich, admired but no longer free. So ended the last native empire of Mesopotamia, not with collapse, but with surrender, not in fire, but in silence. And yet, the Neo-Babylonian Renaissance, though brief, echoed across centuries, in biblical lamentations, in Greek histories, in art, in legend, in every story of towers, of gardens, of gold-covered gods and stars, whispering fate. Babylon lives, its rulers faded, its gods fell silent. But the memory, like the glow of a dying star, refused to disappear, because sometimes the most unforgettable empires are not the longest lasting, but the last to burn. When Babylon slept, the silent conquest of a timeless empire, no fire, no blood, no screaming crowds, just silence, in a city that opened its gates to a shadow. In 539 BC, Babylon didn't fall. It exhaled and handed its crown to a stranger, who promised not to break it, for nearly 3,000 years. The land between the rivers Mesopotamia had been ruled by its own. Kings rose, fell, vanished, returned. Empires burned hot and burned out. But what happened in 539 BC was different. It wasn't a conquest by sword, but by something far more enduring, a new idea of empire. The man at the center of it was a stranger. A man born not in Babylon, not even in the valleys of Mesopotamia, but in the wind-swept mountains of Persia. His name was Cyrus. Cyrus of Persia didn't come from splendor. His people were once scattered tribes living under the thumb of mightier kingdoms, but under him, they rose, and they didn't stop. He overthrew the Medes, conquered Lydia, subdued Anatolia, and claimed the Ionian cities. He was swift, set him precise and utterly unlike the rulers who came before. What made him different wasn't just his victories, it was how he ruled. While others crushed cities, he preserved them. While others erased gods, he knelt before them. Cyrus didn't just conquer, he listened. Back in Babylon, the throne sat beneath a man increasingly out of step with his people. Nabonidus, king who worshipped the moon god Sin, ignoring Marduk, Babylon's beloved patron, spent years away from the capital, ruling from the Arabian desert while sacred festivals crumbled in his absence. The city murmured, the priests whispered. The people remembered what a king should be. So when the Persians approached, Babylon was not unified. Some resisted, others waited. What happened next became the stuff of quiet legend. No siege, no flames. Cyrus's general Gabrus diverted the river, lowering the Euphrates just enough. And in the dead of night, Persian troops walked beneath the city's mighty walls, through its lifeblood, and entered. Unseen, the Babylonian Chronicles simply notes, the city fell without battle. Even the book of Daniel, with its visions and riddles, speaks of writing on the wall. A king feasting while his empire dissolved around him. By dawn, Babylon was no longer free, but it was still whole. When Cyrus entered the city himself, it wasn't. As a conqueror, he wore Babylonian robes. He took their ancient titles. He praised Marduk as a foreigner, but as one chosen by the god to restore balance in clay and ink. As Cyrus wrote his promise, I did not destroy. I returned exiles to their homelands. I rebuilt what had been neglected. This Cyrus cylinder, found centuries later, became what many now call one of the first declarations of human rights. Among those exiles were the Jews, taken from Jerusalem decades earlier by Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus sent them home with funds to rebuild their temple. In their eyes, he wasn't just a king, he was God's anointed. Babylon would live on, not as the heart of an empire, but as one of its brightest jewels. temples, scribes, and traditions were not erased. They were folded into something bigger, vast networks stretching from the Indus to the Aegean Sea, the Persian Empire. Guided by satraps, linked by royal roads, united by Aramaic and minted coins, offered order without in Babylon. Adapted, its astronomers now served a wider realm. Its priests performed rituals for Persian kings. Its knowledge, once closed in temples, flowed out with long trade routes into new tongues, toward new horizons. Still, not all was peace. Babylon rose in revolt twice, once under Darius, again after Xerxes. But the vengeance that might have come in Assyrian days never arrived. Babylon was punished, yes, but never destroyed. Perhaps even conquerors knew. Some cities are too sacred to erase. And so, Babylon did not die in fire or betrayal. It was not buried in rubble. It was transformed by the very hands that could have crushed it. Cyrus took Babylon's crown, but left its soul. He ended its independence, but preserved its memory, its brilliance, its place in the stars. And maybe that's the greater mystery. Sometimes the end of power is not the end of greatness. Sometimes the fall of a kingdom is the beginning of its legend. Epilogue. Echoes beneath the sand. The legacy of Mesopotamia. What if everything we are, our clocks, our cities, even the very act of writing down our dreams, began not in the age of satellites, but in a land where two great rivers kissed the desert. Tonight, we drift back to the ancient heart of humanity. It's a place not lost, but sleeping, its echoes pulsing beneath centuries of sand. In the stillness of time, when the world was young and the stars seemed closer, there rose a civilization between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. From this fertile crescent flowed more than water. Ideas were born here, systems, stories, the bones of what we now call civilization. It all began in clay humble tokens pressed into tablets, meant to track grain or goats. But soon, those marks began to speak. They told myths, laws, prayers, dreams. And just like that, humanity had found its voice. The world's first writing system was not invented for poetry, but it gave birth to it. These early cities root Lagash, Aridua, more than clusters of mud brick walls. They were experiments in human possibility. They wrestled with questions we still face today. How do we share resources? Who holds power? What does justice look like? In the heat and chaos of these early urban hearts, the answers took shape, not perfect, but lasting. Mathematics bloomed in temples, not classrooms. Priests charted the skies not for science, but for signs. From those rituals emerged calendars, geometry, and the sexagesimal system, the same system that quietly governs our clocks and circles today. Even the law, so often taken for granted, was first carved in stone here. The Code of Hammurabi didn't just list punishments. It whispered a deeper truth, that law should live above kings. That order must outlast power. But perhaps most haunting of all was their literature. Long before Homer, before Genesis, a king named Gilgamesh stood atop his city walls and cried out against death. He searched for immortality, not in gold or glory, but in meaning, in memory. And in that search, he became the first great character of human storytelling. Theirs was not a perfect world. War, inequality, famine all cast shadows across the land. Yet what they built was not just for themselves, they built for those yet to be born. For us, empires rose in Philocadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Chaldean. Names faded, temples crumbled, languages died. But the current never stopped flowing. Like a river slipping underground, Mesopotamia fed civilizations that didn't even know its name. And still, the legacy lives on. In how we write, in how we rule. In how we think about time, justice, and the stars. It is whispered in the corners of law courts. It's into the architecture of cities. It's echoed in scriptures and myths passed from tongue to tongue. It is in the way we plant seeds, build bridges, tell stories. It is in the way we seek to make sense of the heavens and of ourselves. You see, the story of Mesopotamia doesn't end. It lingers, it evolves, flows into us, like a quiet stream joining a roaring sea. And maybe, just maybe, every time we write a sentence, watch the stars, measure a minute, or question the world, we're answering a whisper that began over 5,000 years ago. Between two ancient rivers under a sky full of mystery. So sleep now, dreamer, for the rivers still flow, somewhere beneath the sand. The past is still listening.